we need to be humble and we need to act humbly to say, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are our goals? And how do we actually go about accomplishing our goals in a practical, realistic way, not in some ivory tower ideal way where we don't care about reality because we have some model, but in a way that we actually care very deeply about reality and are prepared to discard models that don't correspond to reality. That to me it's the fundamental crisis of our age, right? Where we have academia and intelligentsia and the
Yeah.
political sphere completely out of touch with reality, but carrying around models that say, this is what will happen when I raise interest rates or lower interest rates or legislate this or legislate that. And it continuously doesn't work, but they won't let go of the model because the practicality doesn't seem to matter to them.
Hello and welcome to the Freedom Footprint Show. I'm your host, Luke the PseudoFinn, and I'm here as always with Knut Svanholm. Good evening, Knut.
Good evening, Luke. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. It's been a few days in a row, actually, of recording. This has been a lot of fun and great to have lots of great Bitcoiners on, including tonight's guest, Tomer Strolight. Very excited to talk to him.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Tomer in a while, which is an oddity because we kept in touch after Miami because we're almost the same person, but from different sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So very much looking forward to having a little chat with him again and see what's going on with him at the moment. Yeah.
Just a quick reminder, if you'd like to support the show, the best way you can do that is on Value for Value. If you use one of the podcast apps such as Fountain or Breeze, you can stream us some sats or give us a boost if you feel like the show is good value for your time. You can also share our content or subscribe to the Consensus Network YouTube channel. And speaking of Consensus, Consensus is what's brought this show together and is the platform that we're building on. They build translations of Bitcoin books and are also doing all this content stuff that Freedom Footprint is a part of. So check them out at consensus.network. And you can also find the lovely shirts that we're wearing. We didn't coordinate this, but we're matching everything divided by 21 million shirts on right now. So you can find that all at knutsvanholm.com. Am I missing anything, Knut?
The books, but people will find them. And another book
Perfect.
called Why Bitcoin, a beautiful book by Tomer Strolight, our guest tonight. So
Perfect.
if you want to support him, you look for that book.
Sounds good. Well, let's just get Tomer on and get started, hey?
Yep.
Perfect. Welcome to the show, Tomer.
Hey,
How's it
wow,
going?
it's been a long time. It's been weird. I'm in a bit of a weird situation right now. I recently was at Pacific Bitcoin. I came back home. I caught COVID, so I had to leave because we've got one of my kids here who has an immunocompromised condition. And then I unfortunately gave it to my wife. So I'm doing a little bit of taking care of people, but it's turned out to be a mild case for us both. And so far, my daughter has not caught it. So we're pleased with that.
Yeah, glad to hear that you had a mild case of COVID because it can be rough. I had a pretty rough one myself.
As we're getting started here, Tomer, could you give us a quick intro for our listeners who might not be familiar with your work?
Sure. I've been involved in Bitcoin since way back in 2013. Uh, just curious about it. One of those people who studied it and fell down the rabbit hole. About February of 2022, I decided I really wanted to dedicate, of 2020 rather, that I really wanted to dedicate a lot of my time to it. I'd lost my fiat job because of the COVID crisis. And I started writing about Bitcoin. And one thing led to another. I ended up writing this series of articles called Why Bitcoin, which I turned into a book. I ended up working closely with Swan, working on their private newsletter, which is called Swan Private Insight, that goes out to their private members, to their high net worth individuals. I ended up making a short film called Bitcoin as Generational Wealth. All of this one thing leads to another, and really wanted to get involved on the more so on the cultural and artistic side of Bitcoin. And so I've been trying to find projects to work on that involve that. And there's one project I'm involved in now, I'm starting to talk about, which we're calling Satoshi, the Cyber Opera, which is a loose adaptation of an article that I wrote called The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, but it's a backstory. It's attempting to tell a backstory of Satoshi. It's really interesting, made up story. But the idea of it is to capture the spirit and the intelligence and the courage of a person who might have turned out to be Satoshi, or a team of people who might have turned out to be Satoshi, as well as going into the details of what the movement means to people. And I think the idea of expressing this through music and dance and staging is a real opportunity, because one of the things that when Knut and I first met, we met at the Miami Bitcoin conference, and it was really amazing to see so many Bitcoiners together. But one of the things I remarked on was just how we're all very much the same. We're all somewhere on the spectrum, and we're all very interested in how a SHA-256 pointer with a target collision value below a certain thing meets. And like, those are really interesting things, and they're why Bitcoin works so well, but they're things that aren't of interest to most people. Whereas the meaningful personal aspects of Bitcoin really is what will connect to people. And so I'm trying to find ways to break through the, here's how it works mathematically, to here's what it means, and here's what it means in your soul, and here's what it means in lots of different ways. And so I think that's what this project, every one of my projects that I'm working on lately, I'm trying to get closer and closer to being able to break through what are all these obstacles that exist in normies discovering Bitcoin and discovering its true story and its meaning. Because I'm just amazed by how many people even adore the story of the background of Bitcoin. It's not just this invention, it's this invention with an incredible story behind it. And the more that you can tell that story, the better it is. Unsurprisingly, it's an opera that's meant to have 21 songs in it. And they tell the story arcs. We've invited lots of artists to contribute and participate.
So you got all the 21 songs already?
No, they're not written. We know what they need to be. And
Okay.
so because like, in order to tell the story, and there's still a lot of flexibility in terms of moving things around, but there is a whole story arc. So for someone like you, you can watch the recording of our last meeting, which will tell this backstory. And I don't want to spoil it for your listeners, but there's quite a few twists and turns in this story that will leave people who are familiar with the story. And it's a bit of a blank canvas. Who might Satoshi have been? What background might that person have had? So it's an attempt to fill in a lot of those blanks with an arbitrary but deeply moving, heartwarming story, one that everybody can relate to, I think, or that has aspects of it that everyone will relate to, and then really showcase the story of this living thing, this creation, and how it connects with different types of people all over the world, and hopefully with some anthems. So I'd love for you to write a piece for it.
I'd love to, at least one.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I've got a couple of Bitcoin related songs written. They're not, explicitly about Bitcoin, but if you read between the lines, they are. And maybe one of them would fit, or I could just adjust the lyrics a little bit, and hopefully it'll turn out to.
Well, I'd be happy to find some
something.
personal time with you to take you through this story if you don't want to watch the recording. And
I'd love to.
And really dig in on some of these things.
We should definitely have a, since you're taking the project more seriously, I should too. Because I trust your judgment on that.
It's amazing how these things come to life in Bitcoin, like that you can manifest ideas that come like this. This wasn't really my idea. It's a woman named DJ Valerie B. Love. So she and I had this call to discuss this, and we brainstormed the story for this opera, and it came out. A lot of things had just happened to me personally in connecting to other creative people in the Bitcoin space, the same people I'd worked on with for the film Bitcoin is Generational Wealth, and other people we'd added to that team. And my head was just filled with all these ideas. And then we sat down to write this thing, and it came pouring out, and it felt really natural and really positive. And we were talking about it with people at Pacific Bitcoin, and she's been talking to people about it in El Salvador because she's been down there since. And people who are enthusiastic attach themselves to the project. And I have a feeling it could turn out to be really great. I don't want to set the expectations too high, but I also don't want to set them low. I want to say, you know what, we're aiming to do a world-class production that will have memorable, unforgettable music, tell an unforgettable story, a moving story that will be appealing to just about anyone. When I first started talking about this with people in Los Angeles, it was other people who said to me, I didn't care much about American history, but Hamilton was something that everyone was talking about and seeing. And I ended up learning more about early American history because of that musical than anything else. And I think there are so many cultural works that end up teaching us about history and about important things because they were moving enough for somebody to create a cultural work inspired by a true story. And that's what I'm really hoping comes out of this.
The Book of Mormon comes to mind.
That's, but that's interesting in that it's a satire. And I think there's plenty of examples of inspired musicals that really move people to be sympathetic to a cause or be awakened by a cause. I think of Les Mis, which is based off of a novel, a fictional novel by Victor Hugo, but did that ever popularize that story in a way that the novel never managed to itself, despite being written by perhaps the greatest novelist of all time? So when you take a story and you set it to stage and to music, it suddenly takes on a deeper life and ultimately gets made into a film that's widely seen. So I want to be able to be involved in something like that for Bitcoin and for the story of Satoshi.
Of course. The thing I love so much about Book of Mormon is that while it points out the stupidity of the whole movement, it also points to how well intended everyone is. So everyone's in it for the right reasons, and these stories get corrupted and twisted for good reasons, good-hearted reasons. And the outcome is bad, but the intent is always good. There's something humane about that story, and I really love it. Highly recommend at least listening to it if you haven't yet.
I think I saw it, but I'm a big fan of, is it Matt Stone and Trey Parker?
Yeah.
The Park guys who wrote it. I think that they've done some of the greatest satire in a generation. But for whatever reason, I just don't remember Book of Mormon terribly well. I remember a couple of people. That to me is almost like a little bit, in my case, a little bit of a counterexample as a historical piece of a musical. This is a bit of a serious piece, and there's a lot of cheering and marching together as things succeed for Bitcoin. But there just even thinking about writing what it must have been like to have been Satoshi took me down a couple of paths that I hadn't really considered before. It not just did it take a lot of genius to conceive what he did, but it took a lot of courage to put out, to hide yourself. And then the whole time that you're hidden and at any moment could be found out and could be arrested, but being out there, putting out the word, fixing the code, connecting to the repositories, answering questions on bulletin boards. Every time he did that, or she did that, or they did that, every time they exposed themselves to potential capture, to potential arrest, to potential something or other, even when they exposed themselves to their friends, right? Like they were not even able to identify themselves or reveal themselves to their closest friends and greatest supporters, because everything they did, they were hiding from their greatest opponents and greatest enemies. And so it just to even relate to the series of activities that had to be gone through to create and release Bitcoin in the unique and special way that it was created and released is a dramatic enough story right there that people can just see if you tell it well and you tell it right. Like, wow, something really unique happened here.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I always envisioned Satoshi as a Norwegian black metal guy with a white face, 2 meters long, a little long black hair, and yeah, devil worshipping black metal guy. That's because it would be so fun if that was the case.
I have a very different backstory. Yeah, I think what would be interesting is if different people try to conceive different backstories, but tell an interesting story. People can tell whatever stories they want, but if you can conceive a really interesting backstory and tell it in a dramatic way or a comedic way or just any really compelling way, because the more that people do that, the more people are exposed to it and can then judge for themselves what they think is interesting about it.
Oh, I need to make a shout out to our dear friend, Mr. Fractal Encrypt, who just made his first contribution to Bitcoin Core.
I saw
That's
that.
amazing.
Yeah. Do you know what it's called? I haven't had a chance to go on GitHub and
No,
see what it's called.
I glanced over it. PR ads missing transaction bracket descriptor example to help derive addresses examples. The functionality added in hashtag 24043 is significant departure from ... I'm not going to read more.
Alright. So you can see we're maybe pursuing some simultaneously different goals in trying to create cultural works and improving the code
Yeah, I have
of a hashtag or something.
no intention of ever contributing to Bitcoin Core. It
Mhm.
feels a hurdle a tad to a threshold a tad too high to get over for me.
Mm. It doesn't feel like a priority for me right now, but I never say never, because you never know at what point in time you're going to go down a particular rabbit hole that might send you
No, that's true.
towards
true.
making a contribution at some point, or
Yeah.
at least towards having a very firm opinion about a contribution and reviewing a contribution.
Yeah.
There's so much to be learned when different things go in there. So it's
Yeah.
nice to see a friend of ours making an effort to make a contribution.
How was Pacific Bitcoin?
Yeah, Pacific Bitcoin was really extraordinary. It was such a great vibe. I think the size of it was just right. Something was great about, just perfect about the weather, even though it was a little bit cold. And the fact that it was a Bitcoin only crowd just made it really special. So despite the fact that everything was in crazy mode because FTX was melting down, nobody was in a panic who was there. And the dialogue and the discussion it wasn't a lot of "I told you so." It was just like, we're here to talk about Bitcoin, and we're here to talk about the future that Bitcoin can create. And so people were really just interested in engaging on further discussing where Bitcoin is headed, rather than getting caught up in, oh, there's shitcoiners here trying to wreck things for us, because it wasn't any of that, or there's some narrative that we have to avoid. It was just a very natural thing. It was like a gigantic Bitcoin meetup of hundreds and hundreds of people. And everywhere you went, there were just people who were really happy to be together and talk about this thing that they're excited about, that's bringing justice and freedom and rationality and sanity to the world. And there were lots of people of all sorts of different backgrounds. It was so much more diverse in that. And I don't just mean it in this traditional woke sense of it, although it was very multicultural and multi-gendered and just really high variety of people, but so diverse in terms of what was bringing different people in terms of background. So it wasn't all just Bitcoin maximalist people who dedicated their lives to Bitcoin. There were lots of artists. There were lots of people coming from all sorts of different professions. It was just a really, really interesting group of people. And everywhere you turned, something else interesting was going on and a great conversation was had. And so it became tiring, of course, just like any of these other great Bitcoin conferences, but you're just constantly meeting people and constantly talking to people. But it's so uplifting and energizing at the same time, because you're like, wow, this is becoming so real. And there's so many people who are genuinely into Bitcoin, and they share the same values and they share the same reasons. And it's more than just some kind of fringe group of people who have maybe lost their minds thinking that a computer program is going to change the world. It's like, it's happening, and they're convinced, and they've all been convinced, and they've all verified for themselves and taken all these different journeys, but are all in kind of the same area from having taken all these different journeys, which itself is then further reassuring to say, wow, if we can just 10x this and then 10x that, then we'll have sound money for enough people in the world that it really matters. And that'll change the world in some way.
Sounds like Baltic Honey Badger in Riga, which is you should definitely try to come to one of these years, because it's one of the absolute highest ratio between signal and noise. There's almost no
it seemed like Pacific Bitcoin was just at the tail end of a few really positive European conferences. And there were a few people there, Natalie Brunel and Greg Foss and Jeff Stewart, who had been to the European conferences, and they were coming on the tail end of those to this conference, and it was just all great.
Funny you should mention those three, because they probably told you, but we spent like a week in a bus together, or a half a week in Bulgaria. So I'm thinking of printing "I survived 4 days in a bus with Greg Foss" t-shirts. We'll see.
I'm sure he'd wear
what happens.
I'm sure he'd wear his.
Yeah, no, I had some great times there. The first in Amsterdam, of course, the Bitcoin conference. It is what it is. I have mixed feelings about it. I love it in a sense, and I love it that they give us such a platform, and it gets more and more Bitcoin oriented over time. And I think
Mhm.
they have good intentions, but they do let all these shitcoin companies in as well, and they depend somewhat on money from them, and it makes the thing bigger, which is good in a sense, but bad in a sense too, since Bitcoin gets
Yeah.
confused with all these scammers.
I think
Uh,
that's what was really special about Pacific Bitcoin. The fact that it was only Bitcoiners and you didn't have to have your guard up, right? Like
no,
you knew every booth you were going to was not about to tell you about the latest
yeah,
token that builds on Bitcoin. There was no one pulling any fancy wordplay on you. There was just Bitcoiners sharing their projects. And so if there was this, you could let your hair down, you could let your guard down and really listen and explore.
yeah. Jeff Booth said something interesting about that, that you have a higher chance of actually converting someone at a shitcoin conference than at a Bitcoin conference. A maxi at a shitcoin conference is probably having a bigger impact than a circle jerk of Bitcoiners. Then again, I love circle jerks of Bitcoiners because that's where we come up with all these great ideas and all these great projects. And just meeting everyone is so wonderful. Like you, as we've befriended some of the best people in the world, and we're lucky to find ourselves in these circles and just being able to have these conversations. It's just a great feeling. But having said that, I think there's something to that, that you have a higher chance of converting people at different conferences. And the one in Bulgaria was called Crypto Revolution, but it was a maxi conference. Like the event organizer was a total maxi, and it was advertised as a crypto conference, but then it was Bitcoin only when people actually got there. And the third conference I went to, or the fourth, the one in Prague called Liberty in Our Lifetime, that wasn't really Bitcoin oriented at all, or money oriented. That was a conference about parallel structures and free cities, free private cities across the world, and whatever projects, homeschooling and such, and whatever along those lines. And one of the organizers managed to sneak in a bunch of us toxic maxis in there to convert some people and put them on the right track. And that was really good. I was there with Svetsky and Daniel Prince for, we had a table where we sold our books, and Nico was there as well from the Consensus Network. And we sold out at all the conferences, and yeah, it was really
Wow,
good.
it's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we walked through all the conferences. No, have you been to any other conferences, by the way?
No,
I,
I like for me, these conferences are really very special treats because my travel's been restricted, not because of just these government interventions, but for real grounds. I've had a lot of health issues in my family, and without getting into the details of them, I've had to be very cautious about. I've had to be present to help take care of sick family members, and I've had to be very cautious about potentially bringing back anything for people who are very immunocompromised and very sensitive. So I'm held back by the situation, and so it's a very special treat when I do get to go to these things, and so I definitely try to make the most of them. But I wish I could be out and about a whole lot more. I do love the experience of going to Bitcoin conferences and Bitcoin events. But it's just the reality. Sometimes
yeah.
you're dealt a particular
Yeah. Yeah.
hand that you have to deal with. You have to play
Yes.
the cards you're dealt.
Sad to hear that, but you're right. All you have, maybe this is a rabbit to deep dive into, because that's the thing. At each and every specific moment in your life, you only have the hand of cards that you're sitting on for the moment,
Yeah.
which is, yeah, that's why I think envy and calling people privileged and stuff is so wrong, because every life is tough. It's hard for everyone
Yeah.
at some points, because regardless of your material wealth and stuff like that, there are very few moments in life that are entirely problem free. We do things to relieve ourselves of felt uneasiness, um, as praxeology teaches us. That's the only reason why people do anything at all. Is a state of eternal bliss would imply that you wouldn't do anything ever. All you have at each given moment is the set of cards that are in your hand at that moment. and you get to pick one card at a time to play in choosing your next action. And this is one of the most fascinating things about Bitcoin. We've been talking a lot on this show and everywhere else in Bitcoin about time preference. And I can really feel how much my time preference has changed, because I know a thing like this show it's not giving me any income, any direct income, especially not at this point in the beginning of the thing, or just writing a song or something. I never really realized before why I did those things, but in hindsight, it's a low time preference thing to create something like you create regardless of what they might bring you in terms of material wealth, and you do them for other reasons. Artistic endeavors can be a very low time preference thing. They can be even generational. Think of how the things you do in life echoes through the generations, and maybe you don't have that in your frontal lobe, but somewhere in the back there in your subconscious, you act on a more feel for the long term.
Yeah, I think it's even deeper than that. I think that there are values that money can buy, and there are values that money can't buy. And no amount of money can buy you the satisfaction that comes from putting a creative work into the world that expresses something that you feel deeply about, your view of the world, something that matters deeply to you, something like that. Whether the work of art is commercially successful or not. And many artists that are sellouts try to produce works that are of maximum commercial value, but not true artistic expressions of what's deep within them. And so it goes beyond even low time preference. Like, why am I choosing to spend this piece of time right now with you? Because you're a friend whose presence I appreciate and I can't buy for money. Right? Like it's a value that money
You
can't
could buy
buy.
it for money, though.
Yeah. But how would you show up if I was paying you? Being like,
I would be
know,
very,
even,
very gentle with you, Tomer, and
yeah,
very friendly.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you wouldn't be Knut. You'd be some nice impersonator.
A laptop
Knut.
version, yeah.
And I think that often, so to me, this is more about authenticity than low time preference. And
Yeah.
this is one of the things that I definitely found when I started hanging out with Bitcoiners. It was like, what a bunch of characters, what a bunch of interesting people who will say really interesting things and who have less of a filter and who are really interested in the truth. And I remember commenting at one Bitcoin meetup that I was at, I was like, Bitcoiners are like the knights of the round table. Like someone's a magician and someone's a knight and someone's a gentleman and someone's Lady Guinevere. And there's so much, again, diversity in the personalities and characters. We're not all milquetoast. Hey, did you watch the game last night? Did you see the latest episode of this or that last night, where everyone's talking about what the culture has pushed out at them? They're creating things of their own, Bitcoiners, right? And they're sharing what they've created. And that to me is a rebirth, right? That's a form of renaissance that we're starting to see. Bitcoiners are expressing their creativity, expressing their knowledge, pursuing their own unique knowledge, they're not imprinted upon by the culture so much as they are imprinting on the culture. And again, this to me goes way beyond money, because when you're trying to do something just for the money of the culture, when the money is your only concern, you're not really putting anything very original into the world, and you're selling out. You're selling out. I don't want to say that there's anything bad about earning money and doing something for somebody that they value enough to pay you money for, but there are so many things that money can't buy. It can't buy friendship. It can't buy love. It can't buy integrity. It can't buy the truth. In fact, it can buy a lot of the opposites of these things when it's misused. And these things all seem to matter to this group of people who call themselves Bitcoiners. We're not the exclusive group of people who these things matter to, but it's a very interesting form of friendship that I think I have with Bitcoiners. That is a different kind of friendship than the one that I would have had with colleagues in other companies or friends that I had just grown up with, and we all became parents and all neighbors and consumers of the same culture, where our friendship was neighborliness, I would describe it, as opposed to something that's deep and connected and like we're both really fighting for the same thing and interested in each other's personalities and friends because we've chosen that person to be a friend rather than by happenstance because they happen to be a next door neighbor.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to unpack there because Bitcoiners, I wrote at some point that you can skip all the social charades and theater you have to play with normies, and you can go straight into the deep philosophy things. But it's
Yeah.
because if a Bitcoiner has been around for a while, or even just for during the most recent bear market, and if they stuck to their guns and never went shitcoining and never sold out, you know that that guy or woman or whatever had enough integrity and intellectual honesty to see this for what it is, but they were also open-minded enough to find it in the first place. So there's something there about that instantly tells you that this person's opinions are worth taking into account. They're not just to be
Yeah.
discarded immediately, which is the case with so many other people when they say something there are so many tells that they are totally out of line with reality and that they have no real connection to their reality. They're living in a false reality. And that's the case for so many normies, especially when they start to virtue signal something. I immediately discard them as, and it doesn't matter if it's left wing or right wing virtue signaling. It's basically the same phenomena, but Bitcoiners are different there. As you
Well,
say,
we have to watch out. I think we have to watch out in our Bitcoin community too, because there's the risk of becoming, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit of know-it-alls. And the thing that we do have all the right answers when we've made our share of mistakes as well. And
of
Bitcoin
course,
doesn't give you answers about every single thing. And we can get very manic when the price is up, and we can get very depressed when the price is down. So lots of different
well,
things seem to happen as well. And it's that humility, but I think what we keep getting over and over is a dose of humility, and the people who refuse to be humbled by the truth when it humbles them end up detaching from the community after some period of time. Like what we don't have, which is terrific, is the whole community demands that we tag along with a line that isn't true. If something is demonstrated to be false, then we have to let go of that presumption, and we need to seek out a new truth to replace it, a new theory of truth to replace it.
yeah, but that's what I mean. That the people that do not react to price at all, those are the ones that are really worth listening to. Then, of
Mhm.
course, yeah, it's very important for us to not be arrogant because that's how we alienate people, of course. So if we want to be educators, which is what I guess you and I are in a sense, then we
Mhm.
need to stay humble and realize that people do not see the world as we see it, and we need
Yeah,
to reach them from whatever angle can attract them if
right.
we're going to make them see this better reality that we are already in.
Yeah. And I think Bitcoin isn't an automatic revealer of the truth. It says you have to do the work to find the truth. And I think that's one of these really important and special things. It's like we do tend to see truth that other people refuse to see because specifically because we're not a couple, right? Because we're prepared to say this thing that everybody has presumed is true for a very long period of time turns out to not be completely true or not even be true at all. And that leaves us to say, okay, then that doesn't mean I can just make anything else up. It means I have to find what is true. And that requires using some method of understanding truth. And it's in a scientific field, and then you can use a scientific method. But one of the, I think, big insights that many Bitcoiners carry, if not as explicitly as I'm about to state it, is the scientific method can't be used to discover every kind of truth, because not every truth is a scientific truth.
Here, I would make the distinction between a posteriori sciences and a priori sciences.
Okay.
Because most of the sciences are a posteriori, which means that they are based on empirical research, and you do an experiment over and over again to test
Sure.
its validity.
Yeah.
But there are sciences that aren't like that, and one of them is mathematics. The most obvious example is mathematics, which is more. It comes from deductive reasoning alone, and
Hmm.
you can prove that 1 + 1 = 2 without observing it over and over again. And the other obvious example would be praxeology, which is why I fell so deeply down into that rabbit hole. Because when I discovered like the difference between these, between a posteriori and a priori, you get an instant different view of science. Because that means that most science, while very useful, is by definition wrong. Because the map can never be the territory. An accurate description of the universe would have to be the universe itself. But what can be completely accurate is what we can derive from human reason alone. And those things can be accurate. We can say that human action is purposeful behavior, which is one of the most basic axiom of praxeology. So if you try to argue against that, you need to act, and you need to act with the purpose of arguing against that. So you're showing purposeful behavior by trying to argue against it. The same goes for you on your body and stuff. So there are these axioms that are self-explanatory and irrefutable in a way, because arguing against them proves them. So that's
I'm
what
trying
I
to,
view as real science these days, because I think those sciences that are a priori, to me, they're the real sciences. And mixing the two, a priori and a posteriori, gives a priori sciences a bad name, unfortunately, especially in these days when you have Pfizer and stuff influencing, and not only Pfizer, but all sorts of big lobbying organizations and states and big corporations financing studies in this and that. So the results are always somewhat skewed. And what kind of science gets done is also chosen by whoever pays the most. But a priori sciences are different, fundamentally different from that. So I think we should make that distinction.
I would add maybe a third class, and I don't know how to define it, but I think that there
Bro
are things,
science.
neuroscience. I think, but I think even something like psychology or economics are fields, and I'm very careful not to necessarily use the word sciences. Right? They are fields in which attempts to describe what will happen when we attempt to overly precisely build models that look scientific are outside this, we're attempting to do something that can't be done. And like in sociology, like you can't predict exactly how a society will behave. You can't even predict with reasonable statistical accuracy how someone might react to something, right? I mean, you have to do all these double blind studies, but the attempt to statisticize, to mathematicize, to scientifize things like psychology is, I think, what led us to a field of psychology that doesn't really get to the bottom of root issues for people who have psychological problems, but instead medicates them with a medicine that in a double blind study will 80% of the time relieve their symptoms, not cure them of their ails or anything like that, because that's what we can cram into the scientific method. We can administer medicines in double blind tests, but we haven't answered the question, well, why is this person depressed? Why is this person anxious? What internal techniques can be that aren't about chemistry can people utilize to overcome their conditions, to relieve themselves of these conditions? And so I think we have these epidemics of mental illness, mental wellness, all of these kinds of things where we're all going about in a state that if we go to the medical profession to cure us, they're prescribing chemicals, and we're left without techniques that actually get to the root cause, which are not chemical imbalances in our minds, but they are traumas and bad ideas, that if we resolve the bad ideas or bad relationships, and if we resolve the bad relationships, we'd be able to get to some solution on them that is more beneficial in trying to deal with things through an overly scientific lens.
Yeah, this is fun because when we discuss, we always try to find where we differ. And I would
Right.
frame it slightly differently, because I think in saying that attaching numbers and mathematics to other sciences is often wrong. And I totally agree with that. But we shouldn't let that drag down mathematics itself into being lumped in with these, because mathematics is an extremely useful tool that can be used for a great many things. And it's something that was discovered rather than invented, really.
Listen,
Uh,
I'm a huge fan of mathematics. I think it's important to
but
know when you can apply a tool.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. And that's what has been so skewed. And that's why scientism is the most prominent religion of today. And it's sad in many ways,
mhm.
because people get the wrong impression of what science is. Uh, because science is not only the scientific method, it's also reasoning, and which is much more powerful, in my opinion. There's a book by Hans Hermann Hoppe called Economic Science and the Austrian Method. And you say that economics is not a precise science, but I would argue that Austrian economics is. All other types of economic schools are wrong and incomplete. But Austrian economics knows its limits. It knows what it can do and what it cannot do. And it accepts that value is ordinal and not cardinal, so that you can never put numbers on people's wants and wishes. It's not something that you can apply mathematics to. And that's why you need to approach it from a completely different angle. And this is why I love that branch of thinking. So
I think that's a
priori,
very interesting, yeah, like that's a very interesting point of view. So when we understand the limits of whether Austrian economics is exactly or not, let's just give it the benefit of the doubt for now.
Mhm.
When we know the limits of how we can apply the tools of mathematics, we can apply the tools of mathematics,
Yeah.
correct? And when we don't know the limits, and that to me is what I think what I'm trying to get at. There's a form of rationalism, of overly mathematization of fields beyond the scope of where mathematics can actually help them or should be applied, that attempts to substitute for the correct method of understanding something that has infiltrated certain fields of study and made them far less effective than they otherwise could be. I think of psychology as the best example that I can because I'm aware the reason people have psychological problems is not because of math. And yet in the field of psychiatry, what I saw when I went to university was everybody
Yeah.
was studying statistics. And it was like, well, statistics is not the answer to
Underlying.
to the problem, right?
Of course
It's not, you're not going to mathematically extract why people are unhappy or depressed or anxious or otherwise psychologically distraught. And so I like that. To me, it's one of these things that it should be clear to a person with reasonable faculty of intelligence. We're trying to do the wrong thing here. We're trying to do something with math that math isn't meant to do.
Yeah.
Math can't describe. So that, anyhow, how did we even get on this topic? We got on this topic by saying
Well,
that one of the things that it's important to be humble about what you know and don't know, and that you need to form theories that
Yeah.
correspond to the truth when you found out that something isn't true. And I think that's the Renaissance. Like, to me, this Renaissance that needs to take place in our modern civilization is, we as a civilization, you can exclude yourself from it. I'm not trying to loop people in, but like, we as a civilization became very arrogant. We thought that science had answered every question. We thought we had the answer to everything, and we became very arrogant about it. And we started misapplying scientific method and mathematics to all sorts of fields and disciplines. We see it in economics. We see it in healthcare. We see it in a lot of different places. We became very arrogant, and now things are starting to really come apart, and our society is not cohesive and coherent, and our globe is not cohesive and coherent. And so we need to be humble, and we need to act humbly to say, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are our goals? And how do we actually go about accomplishing our goals in a practical, realistic way, not in some ivory tower ideal way where we don't care about reality because we have some model, but in a way that we actually care very deeply about reality and are prepared to discard models that don't correspond to reality. That, to me, it's the fundamental crisis of our age, right? Where we have academia and intelligentsia and the political sphere completely out of touch with reality, but carrying around models that say, this is what will happen when I raise interest rates or lower interest rates, or legislate this or legislate that. And it continuously doesn't work, but they won't let go of the model because the practicality doesn't seem to matter to them.
Yeah, the model may work short term to a certain extent, but the long-term effects, that's a whole different ballpark. And the thing I love about praxeology is that it admits that there is no common goal and we are not going anywhere. People have individual goals.
Yeah.
They seek what ends they choose to seek out, and what means they choose to use to reach those ends are completely different for every person.
And
And from those insights alone, you can deduct that it's better even for the thief to not steal, and that theft is always bad. The net result, the net outcome will be worse for everyone. And I think Bitcoin ties into this so well because it points out that all the emperors were naked all along. So when I hear that MicroStrategy has bought Bitcoins and that El Salvador has bought Bitcoins, I scratch my head because they can't. Some guy has the Bitcoins, or there's always some guy that is actually in possession of the Bitcoins, because we've erased this barrier between knowing and owning. So Of course, they can be in multi-sig solution and so on, but then there are a group of guys own the Bitcoin, and it might not be the group of guys that the people who had the fancy papers and the fancy suits thought had the Bitcoin. At any point in time, the whole El Salvador experiment can just poof disappear because some guy ran away with all the Bitcoin, at least as far as the Bitcoins that the El Salvadorian state allegedly owns. They can
Yeah.
disappear. I mean, the Bitcoin is already in the infrastructure in the country, so that's a good thing. But
Right.
this is so powerful and which will change everything to, and it's this, and I know this, and we've seen how big of a difference this is, and we're walking around being baffled by people's inability to see what we see. And now I sound arrogant again, I know, but it truly is an awakening.
Yeah.
Max Hillebrand, who was on this show yesterday, pointed out a thing to me a year back, and that is that there's a distinction between possession and ownership that is very important. Like all words are very important in praxeology. So if you give me, say, your glasses, then I possess your glasses, but you own them. So ownership is contractual, but possession is
Physical.
different. So I can still steal them and run away with them. And
Right.
with Bitcoin, like knowing is possessing. It's not owning, but it's possessing. And it makes it way easier to just take the stuff and go away and cross a border and disappear.
Yeah. There's that expression, possession is 9/10 of the law. And I guess you're saying something like in Bitcoin, possession is 100% of the law.
But it is. It is. And it changes everything because now, like, you have something that can't be confiscated. Even if someone points a gun to your head and you give them all your Bitcoins, they cannot know that you gave them all your Bitcoins. You can have
Right.
given them a very small part of it and still have the rest somewhere else.
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing and if you just didn't buy them all at the same time. And that requires you to have different Bitcoins. But still, there's no way for the thief or the perpetrator to know that they actually got away with what they thought they got away with. So it's probably better for them to interact voluntarily with you and give you something of value back instead.
I think that there's so much to still be discovered, right? And we can formulate theories about what owning a significant amount of Bitcoin will be like at a point in time when Bitcoin is actually used as money and transacted by significant parties. But we won't really know until we get there, and we won't really know until we start experiencing what works and what doesn't work. We're still so early, as the meme goes.
Yeah.
We can formulate really interesting theories, but sometimes theories turn out to be good in theory and not in practice. And we'll end up seeing that things aren't exactly as we predict they will be.
They probably won't be. But another thing that my friend Volker Herminghaus pointed out to me in Riga, the guy that translates my books into German, he had a lens to view Bitcoin improvement proposals through. In order for Bitcoin to change, there needs to be like a 95% consensus everyone needs to agree that the change is for the better. But the lens he viewed that through was that what that implies is that Bitcoin can only get better. It can never get worse, because everyone defines better by what was implemented in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So if no one disagrees, it can either stay the same or get better over time. And that, which by extension means that civilization can only get better from this point onward. And poof.
Unless 95% of us make a mistake. But it actually is the case. When I'm introducing people to the concept of Bitcoin, they sometimes ask this question, like, it can't be changed at all. And I say, no, it can only be changed for the better. And they're like, explain how that is. And it's very easy to explain how that is. And they're like, wow, what an invention. So when people just
and then you say discovery.
Yeah. So that's a whole other interesting discussion in and of itself. But I think when people just ask some of the right questions and the right person is there to give them the answers, then something really extraordinary starts to click in, because there are a few of these things. Like you've mentioned a couple of them already. The knowing is owning, and it can only get better. There's a few of these features that Bitcoin possesses, these attributes that Bitcoin possesses, that are so mind-blowing because they're so unique and so original. Like, what else managed to make their software worse all the time? GM managed to make their cars worse all the time. How did this other thing exist that can only be made better, generally speaking, from what we understand? And how does this thing exist that nobody can corrupt? And it seems to have fixed so many things that are broken about just about everything else that we experience in civilization, that when you start to understand how it does it, this is part of where so much of the misplaced enthusiasm for crypto comes from. It's, oh, if there are actually people who say, if Bitcoin can do this, can we do this in other realms? Okay, Bitcoin has done this for
Yeah.
money. Maybe we can do it for, and then the ideas start to get silly, but it's like, maybe we can do it for
No.
bonds, or maybe we can do it for stocks, or maybe, and what people fail to analyze is that all of those things that they're trying to do them in are things that they actually want people in control of. And so they immediately are confronted with this. If people can't be in control of this decentralized autonomous organization or the shares for this company, then it can't do what it needs. So we need to put people in charge. And then they've already defeated the whole purpose of decentralization. But they can't let go of the idea that they want to like they love. So there's people who love so much about Bitcoin that they're trying to bring it into these other realms, but they immediately have to compromise on one of these dimensions. And now you can no longer bring it. Right.
Yeah.
And the minute that you can no longer bring it, you end up with this terribly distorted perversion of both what Bitcoin is and what the other thing might have been intended to be. And you're left with this horrible Frankenstein monster of a shitcoin, really, is what emerges.
Yeah. I often wonder, what if money or cash or, medium of exchange, and all of these words had been left out of the white paper altogether. So it was just promoted as like a mathematical experiment in order to create something that couldn't be copied in a computer network. And that was it. Like
digital scarcity.
Here's
digital scarcity invention.
Yeah. Or
decentralized digital scarcity protocol.
Yeah. I could be a praxeological dick here and say finiteness instead of scarcity, but I'm not going to do that. But instead, just think of it like, if the word money was never presented, then we wouldn't be in any legal trouble ever, and we wouldn't have shit coins, and we wouldn't. This is just the experiment of making something uncopyable on the internet, and then people could choose to maybe I could trade these uncopyable things for goods and services, and then it would become money anyway. But it never needed to be advertised as money, because it isn't really money in the traditional sense. It's so much more, and so much more complex, and so much more interesting than just a good being used as a medium of exchange. This is absolutely finite, and it's pure mathematics, and we never had that, and we will never get that again. It's a one shot thing.
Yeah. No, and this is where I think other people are trying to explore different ideas around this. I'm always curious to follow what Jason Lowery is saying. I can't say that I completely understand everything that he's saying every step of the way, but he seems in honest pursuit or in genuine pursuit of some different kind of analysis of this, of asking the question, will this be something that is of international strategic importance between nation states? Or when there are those of us who think, oh, maybe this will actually reduce the need for the nation state so extensively that it becomes a much less powerful thing. That's the sovereign individual thesis. And there are other people who view, well, it'll just become the money of the world, but it is money. And there are those who view it as a peaceful thing rather than a militarily strategic thing. And we're all, and like, none of us know for sure the answer. I think that's what's interesting about where I say how Bitcoin humbles us all. It says there's something very important and powerful here. We haven't seen how important and powerful it's going to be in finance or in money, let alone in all these other things. But it's so disruptive, and it's that you have to take note, and that many people like you and I and so many others are so deeply curious. It's, I want to make a lifetime out of studying what this thing is actually showing, because someone's got to figure this out, and I've got to figure it out I've got to try to figure it out for myself.
There are so many angles to view it from, and I invited Jason onto this show today. So let's see when he
I hope he comes on. I hope he comes on.
Yeah, because I had an interesting thread about his ideas. I've been talking to him too earlier on, but this was with some other guy, and it was about, like, if Bitcoin is becoming the world's reserve currency, let's say, and everyone starts to use it, you really have no option but to use it. But I argued on the contrary, that it's still voluntary. It's not imposed on
Mhm.
anyone. So it's still going to be voluntary. And just because the choice is so much obviously better than all other choices you have, if it's voluntary, it's still voluntary. And I think this is, I don't know exactly, I haven't done a deep dive into what Jason Lowry thinks about things, but I think this is one of the points where we differ in our thinking about it, because just because something is so good that everyone uses it doesn't mean that it's imposed on people. So like
Mhm.
the wheel, a circle is the best shape for constructing a wheel. And people choose to construct wheels circularly because that's, you would be
Pretty
stupid
good
not to.
choice.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
pretty good choice. It's obviously the better choice. And you can have a government trying to impose square wheels on every car in the country, like in East Germany, where they built the Trabant, which was basically a square wheel. Anyway, you can have that, but you're choosing the better option is, in my mind, is not non-voluntary. It is the voluntary choice, because it's the better. It's just that it's so good
Such
that
a great,
everyone would choose it.
yeah, it's a beautiful point. It's, you know what, you have no better choice. So it's not like people are going around saying, I'm being forced to use the circular wheel. It's like nobody's saying you're forced to use it. Feel free.
No,
You can use a triangular wheel or a square wheel
yeah,
if you
go
want.
ahead.
But the rational choice, and I like this is a very deep concept that you're sharing. Nobody's forcing you to do the best that there is.
No,
It's the rational choice of a rational actor to choose the very best and most appropriate things that they can to build something. You want to build a 30-story skyscraper, you're going to use steel and concrete. If you want to use wood, be my guest, but it'll blow down before you finish building it. Right. So I think that to anyone who actually ends up saying, well, I'm forced to use the best thing, there is some kind of irrational desire, some kind of nihilistic desire, even to say, I want to be able to make the rules up as I go along, and I don't want to be obliged by the rules, the laws of nature, right? Because this is when we say what's best, we're actually like we're saying what's naturally best, right? It's naturally best to use a circle. It might not be best in the eyes of the cult of square wheel worshippers, right? Or it might not be best in the eyes of the government bureau that is in charge of trying to pass the square wheels, or somebody else who's right, or like but this is actually like, where does this apply? Like, we see this apply in crypto all the time, right? There are very broken ideas, like ideas as worse than the square wheel, right? In
yeah,
crypto.
proof of stake.
Yeah, they're fundamentally broken. Proof of
Mm.
stake, Dentacoin. And you could just decentralize autonomous organizations that are not decentralized or autonomous,
Yeah.
but they are like, these are really, they're not circular wheels. And the NFTs, this notion that you can actually protect a JPEG by putting a hash of it on a blockchain that itself
Yeah.
isn't decentralized or immalleable. These are badly broken ideas, and the people who advocate for them genuinely get upset when you point out, look, this doesn't actually work. This is like trying to build a skyscraper out of wood, or it's like trying to make a wheel that's triangular. And they genuinely get very upset. And so this isn't a silly example that you're citing of the triangular wheel. It's a commonplace phenomenon that there are
Yeah.
people who have hitched their
It's
wagon
everywhere.
to the triangular wheel.
Yeah. Nation states themselves are an example of a triangular wheel. It's a way of conducting business that is suboptimal. So, so that's not how we should run countries. Like, it shouldn't be countries, but
Yeah.
there are better ways of human interaction than
Mhm.
enforcement.
I'd love to come on again and continue this conversation, because I think every time you and I speak, like, we go down these rabbit holes, like, we bring them
Yeah.
back around to Bitcoin, because that's our aim. But what we're really exploring how people understand things, right? And how people can apply tools of cognition to better understand what's going on around them, and to rule out
Yeah.
good decisions versus poor decisions. I think we had some really good discussions on that. Like, when I recap the most recent part of our conversation and the beginning as well, which is like, what's a good way to communicate to people, right? When I'm not some great artist, but I'm trying to discover how to apply art in teaching other people about Bitcoin. And I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to have some delightful experiences. But all of these things they come down to, there are so many different ways that the human mind can try to understand things. And some are valid and some are invalid, and some are partly valid and partly invalid. And the partly valid, partly invalid ones are actually very interesting if you're humble enough about them, right?
Let's
Like if
call
you're
them
humble enough-
valis.
but if you're humble enough to say, this work of art moved about this thing, and I know it wasn't telling me the exact true story of the history of Satoshi Nakamoto or this thing, but it concretized something that was very important and helped me to see it in a way that I never would have before. And I know that it's not exactly true, right? Like, why do we read fiction? Why do we enjoy fiction? Because it helps distill something through a made up story about something that's very real. And for me, I think these are all really, really valuable tools to help us understand the universe that we live in, which is such a complicated and difficult to understand thing. It's so overwhelming. And so we can rely on the sciences, but we can also rely on the arts, and we can rely on all these different tools of cognition. And we need to be humble about understanding that some are applicable in some instances and not in others. And so that's my big takeaway from this conversation.
Yeah.
Which
I
I get
just,
something from a chat.
I just remembered what I was going to say, and it's
Sure.
about, someone pointed out to me that, or asked me the question, what's the difference between wanting to own an NFT and wanting to own any other piece of art? It's still just subjective, the value of the thing. But the problem I have with NFTs is that they're advertised as something they're not. Because most of them are built on shitcoin blockchains, which aren't worth anything and are not what they're advertised to be. They're not decentralized, they're not secure, they're not anything. They're just pyramid schemes, basically, and Ponzi scheme. Like, but even an NFT issued on the Bitcoin blockchain, all the security model of the Bitcoin blockchain goes away. It's not valid anymore as soon as you tie it to something in physical space. Because you're not proving anything. You can prove that you signed the message at a certain point, but you can't like attach it to the physical world in that sense. And you might as well just use the Bitcoin to buy the proper art. So what's the point? So buy something from Fractal Crypt instead and get a real thing. And you don't have to donate to him every time you resell it, which is also one thing they advertise as being good about the NFTs. And I like, if
That
I
you don't
buy
actually own it.
Yeah, if I buy a piece of art, I want to fucking own it. I don't want the artist, to get a cut every time I sell it. Either he sells it to me or not. And if I want to give him a cut, I can do that still. I don't need a program to tell me what to do with my stuff. So I think,
But I think this
narrative is,
this whole thing where people are selling narratives nowadays, and the narratives don't actually have to correspond to reality, and they don't have to make sense. It's the number of people who I've heard say something like, "Oh, NFTs are good because the artist continues to get a cut of the things." Let's just understand here. If the artist is basically renting out to you the right to find another buyer from which he'll get a cut of the thing, it's like he hasn't sold you his artwork.
No,
He's sold you permission. He's made you his salesman until you successfully sell your artwork to somebody else and he gets a cut. And now somebody else has been recruited as the artist's salesman. So at least call it what it is and try to be honest about it. Right? And I think this is part of the problem, because the reason nobody's scrutinizing any of these things is because the whole thing's actually not about art in the first place. It's about monetary hot potato theory, greater fool theory, right? Let's find somebody else to buy this for more than I can and tell this story it's good for artists. And we'll hopefully disengage someone's critical thinking skills for long enough to say, hold on, I don't actually own this work of art, and I'm not actually buying this work of art, and I'm not actually selling it as the owner of it. I'm exercising my right to be the next person down a chain of selling of a hash that points to some work of art that anyone can make a copy of, and you can't distinguish an original from. There's such a chain of fallacious reason. A chain of fallacious reasoning or bullshit, if you will, that people try to overwhelm you. People try to overwhelm people's, like, there's only so much you can hold in your mind at a time. And if someone hits you with 16 different things that you weren't able to follow each and every one of them, and then at the end, it's like, are you ready to buy this thing? You should run for the hills. But a lot of people are like, this is the world I live in. I don't understand much of what goes around. So there's I don't understand how my
From
TV works. I don't understand how the screen worked over here. But I guess the difference is I can see that the TV works. I can see that the screen works, right? I, I, I can never verify, or I can actually falsify, right? Like, there's a debate I once had with somebody on Twitter Spaces where they said, well, you have your view about Bitcoin and I have my view about NFTs. And I said, but the difference is I can actually validate and verify my truth about
exactly.
Bitcoin, and I can falsify your claims about
Yeah.
NFTs. And so then
Yeah.
that person left the room abruptly because that was the distinguishing point. There are things that you can verify and there are things that you can falsify. And it's important to try to do those things. If I could demonstrate that you don't actually control a Bitcoin, that I can actually move, so a Bitcoin that you claim is yours, and that it is by rights yours, then Bitcoin is broken and Bitcoin's a lie, but you can't. Whereas when I can right click your NFT and make a perfect copy that's indistinguishable from the copy you have, I have falsified your claims that you actually own this work of art. Because I can do anything with it that you can do with it.
Yeah.
So
and
anyhow,
except money laundering, because from what I know, that's what they're mostly used for, is to launder money, and that's a beautiful thing in itself. So let's give them that. Yes.
Yeah, the fact that that some folks can get away. If it was only, to be honest, if it was only money laundering that NFTs were being used for, I'd say let them have at it. And I've seen a lot of instances of where it's used to mislead naive, even children, like nieces and nephews of mine who've shown it. Like, they're not money launderers. They're kids thinking that they've been shown some way to make money. And so instead they've been ripped off by some venture capital firm in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so someone added bleach to their money laundromat, and now all their clothes are smaller and miscolored. But no, bad metaphor. But anyway, Luke, Luke, do you have something to add to this?
The only thing to add to this thread is, as Giacomo said in Riga, money laundering is beautiful.
Yeah.
Tomer, this has been a great conversation. I won't keep you too much longer. I like to thread pull, so I'd like to have you on another time and continue this conversation. That'd be great. But is there anywhere you'd like to point our listeners towards to find out more about you and your work?
I think if you're looking for some piece of content that's good for orange pilling other people or just answering some basic questions, I would say my book, Why Bitcoin. It's very short. It's like 27 articles, each of which is only 2 to 3 minutes of a read. And you can get it for free at events.swanbitcoin.com/whybitcoin. Or if you go to blurb.com/user/Tomer Strolig, because they don't put my whole name. So TOMERSTROLIG. You can order a hard copy of it, but you can also, there it is, at Tomer Strolight on Twitter, on my profile page, you can find a link to the book. And I think it's the only Bitcoin coffee table book that is out there. I've got lots of stuff. If you look for me on Medium, I think one article that people really enjoy that I published in September, called The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto. Explain why people have spiritual experiences who start to study Bitcoin and why it leads to that and how that starts to happen. But I've written a lot of stuff, and there's lots of stuff on Medium. There's lots of stuff on the Swan blog, which is swan.com/signal. If you just Google for me, like if you're interested in any kind of the stuff that I've written, and if you have 15 minutes, watch my movie, Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. Just Google Bitcoin is Generational Wealth YouTube, and it'll come up on Swan's channel. And these are all of my attempts to try to communicate about Bitcoin in my own voice and in a way that's a little bit different from others, although everyone still thinks I'm Knut Svanholm for whenever he puts out something new. So
yeah, it's funny. Hey, it's Knut is Tomer from Europe, and Tomer, you're Knut from Canada, right? Or
yes.
The American side of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that'll work. Yeah. That'll work. And I've liked a lot of your work. One that I thought was really interesting was the piece you did about the independence wars. I really enjoyed.
Oh, the fork wars. So, thank you for reading that. I wanted to bring an artistic tone to talking about the fork wars, because it's one thing to write about, to objectively report on something, which is what journalists do. But it's another thing to experience it from the front lines, to experience war from the front line. And that's what I tried to do in that piece, is to tell the story of the fork war from the front line. So that's on Bitcoin Magazine, and it's called Cyber Soldier, Freedom Fighter. And it's my account of what it was, my firsthand account of what it was like to be in the fork wars, stylized like the memoirs of a soldier in the war.
Yeah, I really liked it. It inspired me to go read the Block Size Wars too. It was just
Great.
so interesting.
Great,
So
great.
yeah,
Good.
that's just a taste for our listeners. You've got
Yeah.
some great work. I
Thank you.
encourage everyone to check out more. I think you're the only Tomer Strolight out there, right?
I'm actually there's a lot with 2 T's and 2 L's and an I instead of an L. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a lot of imitators, but I'm the one on Twitter with something like 33,000 followers or something.
Got
They
it.
have way more or way less.
We'll link to the right
They're
one. That's
bot.
for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sounds
Sure.
Okay, great. It's been a real pleasure talking to you guys. And I'll look forward
Same
to our
to
next
you,
one.
brother, and hope
Yeah.
to see you again soon in real life as well. And I would
Be great.
invite you on here anytime.
That would be
Yeah.
amazing. I'm definitely up for it. All the best, my friends. Nice
Yeah.
to meet you as well, Luke. And look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Tomer.
Thanks a
Appreciate
lot,
it.
Tomer. See you next time.
Take care.
Take care.
See you.
See you.
Okay, this has been the Freedom Footprint Show. Just a reminder about everything we've previously discussed. Yeah, exactly. Knut's got the Why Bitcoin
is.
up right there. Nice that you had it handy.
Yeah.
So
Do you want me to read for the audience what he wrote to me in gold here?
if it's not too personal, yeah, sure. Or maybe that makes it better.
I think I can read it. Otherwise, we'll cut it out. But I think so. Dear Knut, when we've shared our residence together for over 400 blocks, we automatically became Bitcoin brothers. You can count on this family member for friendship and support whenever you need it or want it. April 2022, Miami Beach, Florida, Tomer Strolight. So
Wonderful.
I treasure this copy very much. And
Of course.
yeah, he's a dear friend. Like so many others in this space, not taking anything away from anyone else. There was a time in my life where I thought I was too old to make new friends. But Bitcoin has disproven that over and over again.
Yeah, it would
Very
be
much
sad if
so.
that were to happen in life, and especially to you, because yeah, it's been great your influence on the Bitcoin community only in this such short a time. And that message should show everyone who is a fan of yours, go check out Tomer, because as you say, you're basically the same person, and he seems to agree.
Yep, that's it. And we try to invite mostly friends on this show. And if they're not friends, they will be after the conversation, I hope.
Exactly. That's the goal anyway.
Yeah.
If they're not, something's gone wrong.
Yeah. Then fuck
Perfect.
them.
Exactly. Perfect.
All right.
Okay, so I think that's it for tonight. This has been the Freedom Footprint Show. Just a reminder, the best way that you can support the show is to use a value for value podcasting app such as Fountain or Breeze. You can stream us some sats or give us a boost if you enjoyed the show and you thought it was worth your time. And we also appreciate sharing, subscribing to the Consensus Network YouTube channel, all that sort of thing. The podcast is supported by Consensus Network, and this is the platform that has enabled us to have this show. So we're grateful to them. Check out consensus.network for more information about them and their translations of Bitcoin books. And check out knutsvanholm.com for the lovely t-shirts and more everything divided by 21 million merch from Knut Svanholm. Anything else, Knut?
And books and videos and everything else. And check out the freemadeira.com website, where everything about the free Madeira object is on there. Yeah, have a look at that and come and visit Madeira at some point. I think I'm going there late February, beginning of March. That's when I plan to visit next time, but nothing is set in stone yet. But there will be news. I'll keep you posted about anything Madeira related that's going on too.
Okay, this is the Easter egg for everyone who's stuck around this long. Keep your ears open for something about Madeira. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's it for us for tonight. So thanks for listening. This has been the Freedom Footprint Show, and we'll see you next time.